Maps used to be cool. Today you go on Google Maps and they look like this. Even if you buy a printed map, say from National Geographic, they still look a little better, but it's always terrain, roads, always information, and very rarely aesthetics. So what happened? My first guess is as time went on, function trumped beauty. The point is that it works and is as cheap as possible, and that's it. I mean, we kind of see it with everything. Phone booths stopped being unique. Street ballers are just metal sticks. Unique logos became flat, generic lines or text, and intricate furniture turned into standard IKEA. There's a general shift to corporate minimalism, if you will. So, is this what happened to maps too? Maybe. Let's take a closer look. This is the Tabula Peutingeriana, also known as the Peutinger table. It's an illustrated itinerarium, essentially an ancient road map, showing the layout of the Cursus Publicus, the road network of the Roman Empire. The one we're looking at is actually a medieval copy made in the 12th century. I think the original was lost, and it dated back to between 27 BC and 14 AD, during the reign of Augustus, the first emperor and founder of the Roman Empire. The map consists of an enormous scroll measuring 6.75 meters long and 0.35 meters high. The digital version is over 28,000 pixels wide. The aspect ratio makes it pretty difficult to look at it in one go. We have to travel through it sideways, essentially take our time to do it. Maybe that's a good metaphor for how things were back then. And I think it presents us with a perfect example of how function and aesthetics can coexist. The map was ordered by a Roman emperor to depict the road network of the empire. There was an objective goal and function that the map was to fulfill, but yet it's also beautiful. The contrast between sea and land uses interesting colors, a beige and a mix of dark blue and gray. It uses texture. You see stripes in the sea instead of just flat colors. The roads are depicted in red, a strong color. There's a lot of text and no concern with clutter. And towns are depicted by little houses or buildings with different shapes. Isn't that so much cooler than just dots? I mean, imagine Google Maps using tiny houses to depict settlements on our maps today. In the middle of the map is Rome, with the emperor depicted on his throne. I mean, imagine if a map of England today had just King Charles as the icon for London. I'm not a monarchist by any means, but that would look pretty cool. And what is craziest to me is that this was a road map. Compare it to road maps today or the GPS app on your phone, and they're like this, arguably even more cluttered, with unnecessary obsessions to depict satellite projections of the country rather than artistic ones, which might actually make navigation easier to some people. And speaking of satellite maps, where the point is, I guess, to depict a top view of the world, we can look at those types of maps back then too and see how different they were. If we look at something like the Tabula Rogeriana, commissioned by Norman King Roger II in 1138, and completed by the Arab geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi, whose point was to depict the entire known world, it's a great example. It's drawn with north at the bottom and south at the top, following Islamic cartographic conventions of the time, rather than European ones. I think this has to do with Mecca being at the top of the map, as it is in this case with the Arabian Peninsula. Even in a map like this, where the point was to have what we would now call a satellite view of the world, there is an element of uniqueness, if nothing else in the orientation of the map, but there's also an incredible pattern along the ocean water in blue. The lakes are green to differentiate sweet from salty water. Rivers are depicted as stems from plants, with their respective flowers being the sources of each water stream. There is a level of artistry and creativity that doesn't really take away from the role of being precise as a map. Sure, the whole proportion aspect is wrong, with the shape of India and China being basically non-existent and several Mediterranean islands being way too big, but that's what they knew at the time. And I think sometimes they knew the islands were smaller, but they were drawn larger because they were to be noticed by the reader due to some significance that they had. I guess, to be fair, this one also kind of uses dots for the cities, but even the dots are stylish with a little cross inside them. They're not just basic, you know? And this is just talking about continental or world maps. If we zoom in a little and take a look at, for instance, depictions of cities, the level of detail is even larger. Take this map of the city of Alexandria by Piri Reis. Piri Reis, despite his seemingly Portuguese name, was an Ottoman Turkish cartographer and admiral. Actually, and since I just mentioned the Portuguese name similarity, Piri Reis was actually connected to the Portuguese, but as an adversary. He was the Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Indian Ocean Fleet, and he ended up facing off against Portuguese ships on numerous occasions. He was victorious in some of them, ended up losing in quite a lot of the others. But anyway, he produced several world maps during the time of European discoveries. This is a remnant of one. It shows the Iberian Peninsula and then West Africa, along with the recently discovered Caribbean and the coast of Brazil and the Guianas in South America. In fact, in surprising detail. And while that detail exists, so do the compasses and wind roses at sea, the various ships, the animals on land, the castles, and depictions of local rulers. But I'm getting a little lost. The whole point with him was to mention local maps rather than global ones. Like the one I introduced before, his map of Alexandria. The land is presented with a gold edge, the base, two fortresses, the walls and palace of the city filled with individual houses of varying styles, the two mountains of the city, and the Ottoman flag flying above it. His depiction of Venice is equally impressive, with the gondolas and galleys sailing around the floating city. There was a point to show the character and identity of a location, not just what the location looked like in terms of urbanism and geography. You could argue that these were more illustrations, pieces of art, sure, but they were also maps, and they were very successfully at conjugating function and aesthetic, something that seems to have been lost. So now that we understand what maps looked like back then, in contrast to what they look like today, let's try to understand why that difference exists and essentially understand why maps became boring. And I think the best way to do it is to take a quick trip along the history of cartography. The oldest surviving map in the world seems to be this one, from the 9th century BC. It's a Babylonian clay tablet with a scheme of their known world. It's centered on the Euphrates River. A number of cities are shown, but the inscriptions are so unlike what we are used to that for a non-expert like me, they just look like scribbles on a rock. And to see maps that are a little closer to what we are used to, we need to travel a few centuries to the future, to the time of ancient Greece. Aneximander was a Greek scholar who lived in the 6th century BC, and it's possible that he created a map that looked something like this, depicting the world as a circle divided into three: Europe, Asia, and Africa, here called Libya. It's quite interesting because around the same time, the Chinese, in their ancient book Classics of Mountains and Oceans, depicted their known world in a similar manner. Fast forward to 150 AD, and Ptolemy created this world map. Unbelievably accurate in its shape at the time. It shows us all of Europe with the exception of Scandinavia for some reason, a good amount of Africa, and it stretches as far as India and China. In fact, it depicts these two with an incredible level of detail regarding rivers, names of cities, and islands. And it also possibly contradicts my entire train of thought because it's pretty simple. There's no real artistic element to it, which makes me think that maybe I'm wrong. Only certain maps used to look cool while others already looked just like the ones we have today, and the cool element we attribute to them might be their age, the fact that they were depicted on papyrus, drawn with ink rather than depicted on a screen with pixels. But I'm not ready to let go of my position yet, so let's look at a few more maps as we move forward through time. Now guys, speaking of navigation, don't you hate it when you're navigating online and you can't be sure if it's safe? Well, just like navigation maps came along to help our ancestors navigate the open seas with safety, NordVPN, the sponsor of this video, is here to help you safely navigate online. NordVPN has worked with us for years, and the reason why we want to keep working with them is that they are a VPN that actually works and is the fastest one available. You sign up, install it, and become safer online with a single click. And the best thing about NordVPN is that it's not just a VPN. They keep adding more and more features that improve your online experience. You can, for instance, use their threat protection feature to stay safe from phishing, scams, and malware. It's like a direct antivirus embedded in it. But they still do what a VPN is traditionally supposed to do, and they are the best at it. Keeping your browsing data safe, even from your internet provider, and changing your location so that, for instance, you can access your streaming catalogs when you travel. I use this all the time when we visit my fiance's family in Norway. So if you want to try NordVPN today, you can do it through the link in the description at nordvpn.com/knowledge to get an exclusive deal and 4 free months. And now let's get back to the video. During medieval times, a flooding of maps entered the records of history. Kings ordered depictions of their kingdoms, the church made their own too. Over 1,000 medieval maps are conserved up to today. Some are just schematics like Saint Isidore's world map of 1472, similar to the one we saw of Aneximander. Others are intricate and impressive like the Tabula Rogeriana we also saw earlier, while some are like this, from the South Song dynasty of China in 1220, depicting their territory and using incredible drawings of mountains and waves. And it is around medieval times that we start having maps like this. Europa Regina by Munster from 1570. It's an illustrated depiction of Europe as a king or queen, I'm not sure, with its various regions. Portugal and Spain are the head and crown, with the Pyrenees as a collar. Italy is one arm, holding Sicily as a sphere, and Denmark is another. Maps like this, or illustrations rather, make me think that maybe I am correct in thinking that cool old maps weren't just illustrations, because this is a clear example of something where aesthetics was essentially the only goal. The others balanced function and beauty. And the map that introduces us to our next time period, the one most relevant for the development of maps, I think shows us precisely this. It was now the age of discovery between the 15th and 17th centuries. The European exploration of what was to them a new world, the inventions of navigation tools and new techniques allowed for more accuracy in new maps. In 1492, Martin Behaim, a German cartographer and advisor to King John II of Portugal, created the oldest globe of the earth. Here we see a depiction of its panels. It still doesn't include the Americas, and while its goal is accuracy and a global view of the known world, there are a number of aesthetic elements that would be unnecessary for that, showing us that beauty was a co-priority too, if you will. Little flags and shields depict who controls each territory. Ships are shown at sea with mythical creatures along them. Animals are shown on land, with local rulers depicted on thrones or inside of tents. Castle towers and buildings are shown. The Red Sea, red only in name, is shown in red on the map. I mean, if that's not an artistic choice, what is? 15 years later, Martin Waldseemüller's Universalis Cosmographia map is simpler, but still includes some of these elements. Flags, animals, people. Even in 1569, when Gerardus Mercator published his projection of the world on a map, which is the one we mostly use up to today, including on Google Maps, his map depicts sea creatures, ships, figures, castles. And his map is the biggest example of function being important. His whole projection of the world is based on using parallel lines of longitude and latitude spaced farther apart as they get away from the equator, so that courses of constant bearing for ships are represented as straight lines. Essentially, it was a map for ships to use at sea to make navigation easier, yet it had those aesthetic elements too. By the way, look at this cool GIF that shows how distorted the map actually makes things seem the further away from the equator line they are. But anyway, just when you thought that maybe beauty was going away, I mean, some of these maps do seem to focus more on accuracy and navigation, and the figures are losing prominence, the art comes back because it was the Renaissance, baby. During this period, maps were made specifically to impress viewers. They were displayed with equal importance as paintings, sculptures. Printing was becoming a thing, and so they were starting to become household items. And in the late 1500s, it's estimated that about 10% of homes in Venice had some sort of map on display. Okay, again, I was editing and something came up that I need to tell you about because, you know, I was trying to find some pictures, even paintings of these homes throughout Italy, maybe in Venice, that depicted paintings on their walls, but I couldn't find them. And I found something even more interesting. In, I think, Florence, there's a place called Palazzo Vecchio. Today, it's a museum. I'm not sure what it was back then, but either way, it has a room full of old paintings of maps. I guess just full of old maps. They were just made by hand, so I guess you could call them paintings. Anyway, online you can actually visit a virtual version of this room. You can walk around, see the globe in the middle, see all of the paintings of maps on the walls. Some depict Anatolia, others depict Europe, other regions of the world that are just so beautifully depicted in these maps. And then you can click on them and zoom in, expand, look at the maps in detail. I'm gonna leave the link in the description if you want to explore it, because if you're into maps like I am, this is just fantastic. But let's get back to the story. This map of the Netherlands and Belgium in the shape of a lion with various illustrative elements is a good example of that. And many others show how during this time, beauty was king or queen. Fra Mauro's map from 1450, which is still upside down by the way, is incredible. It has wavy seas, ships, castles, kings, an unbelievable detail. I think it might be the favorite one of mine from all the ones that I've seen making this video. The Carta Marina by the Swede Olaus Magnus, published in 1539 and depicting Scandinavia, is perhaps the exponent of this. Across the lands you have hundreds of figures, towns depicted by various buildings, soldiers, animals, forests, sea monsters, and ships. You know what? I changed my mind. This is my favorite. But while printing was important to make maps popular and to make them something that people wanted to have at home, it also contributed in the long run to the end of beauty in maps. Because when Renaissance map makers and the ones that came after them shifted from making things by hand to making them with these machines, they were limited by the technical capabilities of them. Woodcut printing, carved from blocks of wood, couldn't produce fine, delicate lines. Instead, it produced thick, uneven strokes, blocky lettering that lacked the elegance of manuscript calligraphy. Intaglio, which was engraving on copper plates, then allowed for more precision, but it was labor-intensive, expensive, and it quickly wore out the plates, making them expensive to replace, and this discouraged highly intricate decorations too. Essentially, because these maps had to be reproduced many times, engravers simplified the designs to reduce errors and prolong the life of the blocks or plates used for printing. Color and decorative elements which were integral to manuscript maps could also not be printed, and then they had to be added by hand afterwards, meaning elaborate gilding or shading became optional and costly rather than just a standard for every map that was produced. And together, all of this made maps from this moment onwards become slowly more uniform and less artistic. At the same time, the world was changing, and so onwards, maps became increasingly tools of administration, navigation, and scientific measurement rather than those decorative objects. As European states expanded, they needed clearer ways to manage their territory. Maps shifted towards accuracy, legibility, and standardization. Coastlines, boundaries, coordinates, and surveying data became the essential content, and that pushed aside the older medieval tradition of ornate imagery, mythological scenes, and symbolic decoration. And the rapid growth of geographical knowledge during the late age of discovery reinforced this. As explorers returned with more precise information, maps had to display dense technical detail, and this left less space for artistic embellishment. In addition to the technical limitations of the printing press, the fact that suddenly there was a huge market for all of these maps also created what I guess we could call market pressure. This pressure encouraged simplicity because publishers prioritized clean, consistent styles that could be produced efficiently for that large market. As a result, the aesthetics of cartography evolved, beauty became secondary, and the map's primary identity was now defined by precision, information, and usefulness, as well as being cheap to produce. My guess is that this just became the norm, and when we moved to modern techniques of printing that would allow those aesthetic elements, or when we moved on to digital displays, we just used these latest maps as a reference point, an example to what we should create. Which is why when we open Google Maps today, there are no flags, no sea monsters, no ships, and no artistic depictions of rivers and cities, even though it would cost absolutely nothing to add them. I guess it's fine, at least we have accurate maps, and some are still beautiful in their depictions of terrain or in the colors they choose to use, but a part of me craves the maps of medieval and Renaissance times. Maybe one day they'll come back. Maybe there'll be a Google Maps update that adds some sea monsters around Scandinavia or some animals across Africa. But until then, we're gonna have to settle for these old ones that luckily we can still look at and enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you next time for more general knowledge. You know, it's way earlier in the day than when I usually record, and I'm by myself at home today, so I haven't really spoken, and now I just started recording, and I don't know, my voice is weird because I haven't said anything out loud. So I'm just talking to myself a little bit to try and get in the flow. Anyway,